Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed with the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We will first hear Mr. Ahmed Shahid, who will present the report. Mr. Ahmed Shahid, you have 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, today I wish to report that I met with the Iranian government officials last week in furtherance of what I believe is an evolving engagement with the government. I believe discussions in this meeting will possibly advance steps for future engagement, which would expand the opportunities for the government to address issues moving forward. I consider this new approach to be positive and believe that this development is the result of the constructive work and efforts of the members of the UN Human Rights Council. Mr. President, I continue to believe that the outcome of Iran's Universal Periodic Review provides a sound platform for both engagement and assessment of the government's progress in promoting respect for human rights in the country. A majority of the 123 recommendations accepted by the government relate to concerns about civil and political rights, social, economic and cultural rights, and concerns about discrimination. My methodology, therefore, endeavors to assess progress made in these areas and is aimed at identifying obstacles to the government's capacity to meet its international human rights obligations. In pursuit of this objective, I have interviewed 268 individuals since March 2012, 169 of whom were interviewed for my current report. I have also followed a wide range of developments reported in both the Iranian and international press, reviewed dozens of statements and reports issued by the government, including its third periodic report to the Committee on Economic and Social Rights, and examined dozens of reports produced by a number of non-governmental organizations, 17 of which are cited in the footnotes throughout my current report. The Islamic Republic of Iran has made some noteworthy advances in the area of women's rights. This includes advancements in health, literacy, and in enrollment rates in both primary and secondary school levels. The Iranian Parliament has also recently extended maternity leave from 6 to 9 months, and the draft new Islamic Penal Code would establish a fund to equalize via or blood money payments of both genders in case of accidental injury or death. However, reports about recent policies that prohibit women's access to a number of fields of study further restrict women's freedom of movement, and current policies that continue to impede women's ability to hold decision-making positions in government remain problematic. In light of the aforementioned interviews and submissions, it also appears that the prevailing situation of human rights in Iran continues to warrant serious concern and will require a wide range of solutions that are both respectful of cultural perspectives and mindful of the universality of fundamental human rights promulgated by the treaties to which Iran is a party. I further regret to inform the Council that 2 reprisal cases were reported in the media in November and December last year. In one case, reports have maintained that 5 Kurdish prisoners located in Urumia prison have been charged with contacting the office of the Special Rapporteur, among other charges. These prisoners were reportedly interrogated and severely tortured for the purpose of soliciting confessions about their alleged contact with me. In its observation on my report, the Iranian government has maintained that judicial prosecution of these individuals is not considered to be an act of reprisal. However, I continue to maintain that the targeting of individuals for interaction with UN special procedures, even through adjudication in a court of law, constitutes an act of reprisal and seriously undermines the work of UN human rights mechanisms. Mr. President, unfortunately, a preponderance of reports communicated to me this past year indicate that the situation of individuals in Iran who advocate for the advancement of human rights, or those that document, report, or protest against human rights violations is grave and continues to deteriorate. Interviews continue to impart that a majority of human rights defenders, including those that defend the rights of women, religious and ethnic minorities, as well as those that work to advance protections for the environment, workers and children, continue to be subjected to harassment, arrest, interrogation and torture, and are frequently charged with vaguely defined national security crimes, which is seemingly meant to erode the front line of human rights defense in the country. My current report also presents what appears to be unimpeachable forensic evidence that torture is occurring in Iran on a geographically widespread and systemic basis, and that methods applied to victims are done so systematically as similar methods reappear in multiple testimonies submitted by individuals in cities across the country and by individuals that have recently relocated from Iran to various countries around the globe. In its observations to my current and past reports, the Iranian government has asserted that both Iranian Islamic law prohibit torture, and therefore allegations of torture in Iran are invalid. However, I continue to insist that the existence of these legal safeguards does not in itself invalidate allegations of torture and does not remove the obligation to thoroughly investigate such allegations. I also remain alarmed at the high rate of executions that take place in Iran, a majority of which continue to take place for drug-related offences, which do not meet international standards of most serious crime. Mr. President, I joined the independent expert on freedom of opinion and expression, human rights defenders, and the chair rapporteur of the working group on arbitrary detention last month in calling on Iran to immediately halt the recent spate of arrests of journalists and to release those already detained, the majority of whom work for independent news outlets. We understand our fear that the arrests carried out We underscored our fear that the arrests carried out were part of a broader campaign to crack down on independent journalists and media outlets under the accusation that they have collaborated with anti-revolutionary foreign media outlets and human rights organizations. Prior to the aforementioned arrests, 45 journalists were detained in Iran. It is also estimated that some 40 lawyers have been prosecuted in the past 3 years, and that at least 10 are currently detained, including Ms. Nasrin Sotoudeh, Mr. Abdul Fattah Sultani, Mr. Muhammad for such crimes as membership in an association seeking the overthrow of the government and spreading propaganda against the system through interviews with foreign media. Furthermore, 5 Ahwazi Arab men were convicted of, among other charges, spreading propaganda against the system and sentenced to death in connection with their founding of an Arab minority linguistic and cultural organization named Al-Hiwar. Reports from multiple sources indicate that all 5 men were mistreated or tortured while in detention and that they were not afforded fair trials. I urge the Iranian government to officially halt the execution of these cultural activists, 2 of whom are teachers, and to take every effort to investigate the aforementioned allegations. It has also been reported that 110 Baha'is are currently detained in Iran for exercising their faith, that at least 13 Protestant Christians are currently in detention in Iran, and that dervishes, members of the Yazidi faith, and Sunni Muslims continue to be subject of punitive activities, raising serious concern about the situation of religious minorities in the country. Last month, I also joined the chair rapporteur of the working group on arbitrary detention and special rapporteur on freedom of assembly and association in a statement urging the Iranian government to immediately and unconditionally release former presidential candidates, Mr. Mahdi Karoubi and Mr. Mir Hussein Musavi, and hundreds of other prisoners of conscience who remain in prison for peacefully exercising their rights to freedom of opinion and expression, of freedom of association and assembly during protests following the elections 3 years ago. I further maintain that freedom of expression, assembly and association are essential conditions for the effective exercise of the right to vote and must be fully protected. Reports or statements by Iranian officials issuing warnings against those citizens who call for a free election and suggesting these calls are conspiratorial and inimical to the Iranian state undermine the full enjoyment of Article 25 of ICCPR, which requires that free communication of information and ideas about public and political issues between citizens, candidates and elected representatives is part of a free and fair election. Mr. President, lastly, I wish to express my serious concern about the potentially negative humanitarian effects of general economic sanctions imposed on the Islamic Republic of Iran, which are engendered by a number of reports. However, I wish to mention that several conflicting statements issued by various officials in the country about the effects of general sanctions have made it difficult to discern the reality of the situation in this regard. And I look forward to constructive and meaningful communications with the government of Iran in order to further investigate this matter and to further engage in dialogue that advances the government's efforts to promote respect for human rights in the country. I thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Shahid, for your presentation. I will now give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Javad Larijani, Secretary General of the High Council of Human Rights, to deliver a statement of the Islamic Republic of Iran as a concerned country. Your Excellency, you have 5 minutes.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى الأنبياء والمرسلين. Mr. President, honorable delegations, Madam High Commissioner, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I would like to congratulate Your Excellency for assuming presidency of the Human Rights Council and wish you every success in your work. Mr. President, the High Commissioner stated in her statement delivered at the beginning of the 22nd session of the Council that the UPR mechanism is a unique mechanism to monitor human rights situation across the globe. I totally share her views in universality of human rights monitoring and rejection of selectivity and manipulating UN human rights machinery. Selective country-specific resolutions will reduce human rights noble concerns to manipulative devices of political rivalry. The two parallel and repetitive reporting procedure in the General Assembly and the HRC, which were established to report about human rights situation in my country, is suffice to illustrate that this move is ill-intended. Against such fundamental assumption, the Islamic Republic of Iran unequivocally rejected creation of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and would maintain this principled position in future. However, this should not be construed as Iran's lack of cooperation with the UN human rights mechanism. On the contrary, we have repeated time and again our genuine intention to conduct constructive cooperation with the United Nations mechanisms on human rights, which are comprehensive and inclusive of all member states of the United Nations. In my meeting with His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the United Nations Secretary General, during his recent visit to Tehran, I expressed my country's readiness to constructive engagement with the Secretary General and High Commissioner for Human Rights. Cooperation with the thematic mandate holders shall remain the principal position of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Furthermore, the Islamic Republic of Iran believes in serious cooperation with international bodies and has continuously reported to related committees on international conventions and found itself legally bound to implement its international obligations. Mr. President, the report before this august body today is a product of an unhealthy, non-objective and counterproductive exercise initiated by the United States of America and its European allies. Therefore, we never expected to receive and consider a balanced and impartial report out of hostile policies of these states. This is why we have in front of us a compilation of unfounded allegations and accusations bearing, unfortunately, only the symbols of United Nations. The behavior and work of the Special Rapporteur, excuse me, Mr. President, in no way meets the minimum standards of fairness and impartiality. As a rapporteur, he is required to observe principle of impartiality, honesty, transparency, fairness, avoiding impacts of political pressures, by conducting opinionated interviews with biased media and being prejudiced about the claims, the rapporteur has reduced himself to a political opponent acting against Islamic Republic of Iran in clear contradiction to the mandate holder code of conduct. Mr. President, furthermore, he has actively worked with the notorious terrorist group in preparing this report, a group which has the blood of more than 20,000 Iranian innocent civilians on their hands, and we have submitted to this gentleman all the records and documents. EU and the United States delisted this most notorious terrorist cult because of their political ends. And now, shedding crocodile tears for human rights in Iran. This further reflects their hypocritical approach toward human rights. There is much more to regret, Mr. President, that the Special Rapporteur has avoided any reference to human rights promotional policies and achievements of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its cooperation with the international human rights mechanism. Mr. President, it is further disappointing that the Special Rapporteur, instead of denouncing imposers of the sanctions and calling them as violators of human rights of the Iranian citizen, he is criticizing the targeted country. What is even more deplorable is that throughout his lengthy report, the Special Rapporteur not even once mentions the unilateral sanction imposed against Iranians by US and the EU, let alone condemning them. Such sanctions are in clear negation of the principles of international law, as well as letter and spirit of the Charter of UN. The position of the Special Rapporteur on these sanctions and their impacts on daily lives of the Iranians remain unclear. It is unlikely that he was unaware about the imposition of unilateral sanction against civilian population in Iran, or about impact of such sanctions on their human rights. Should not this calculated silence be interpreted as concurrence of the Special Rapporteurs with violations of human rights of the whole population of Iran? As a matter of fact, all members of the Council, while taking the resolution for proper voting, should not overlook their responsibility vis-à-vis the current Western assault and violation on human rights of all Iranian citizens. Mr. President, the rapporteur apparently is neither aware of the cultural and religious background of Iran and its obligation, nor even the internationally agreed terms and languages. For instance, he condemns Iran for not having recognized lesbian and gays. None of our human rights obligation requires us to do so. His reference to terms such as marital rape is another case in point. The crucial point, Mr. President, is one thing else. It is the imposition of a special lifestyle which is practiced by some Western communities to all other nations of the world, regardless of their cultural differences and valuable human experiences. Ironically, this brutal cultural invasion and suppression is pursued under the name of human rights and its universality. Mr. President, Islamic Republic of Iran, as the most influential democracy of the region, with its leading advancement in science and technology, strongly believes that the current onslaught on human culture is the greatest crime ever committed to humanity. And let me be quite frank and clear. We, as a Muslim nation and part of a huge Muslim community of the world, have equally the God-given right to choose a lifestyle based on Islamic rationality and our precious culture. Universality of human rights should not be used as justification for demolishing and uprooting the most valuable experience of humanity in creation of different models of living. Rather, it should be a platform to promote respect for others and meaningful interaction. Mr. President, let me conclude. Let me conclude my remarks by rather quick reference to some current issue, which is state terrorism. The 20th century ended while the most frequent slogan of the politicians in the USA and a number of other Western states was relentless fight with all forms of terrorism. And in this theater, US was the flag leader. The scandalous situation in the beginning of the 21st century is the open, overt, and shameless resort to the same state, by the same states, to the so-called United States and a number of European allies to train, to arm, to support notorious terrorist groups and use them for their criminal objectives in the Middle East, including Islamic Republic of Iran. And more outrageous is the shameful support which is given to them by the special rapporteurs, labeling them as human rights defender. Finally, Mr. President, providing vast and baseless allegations on human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the report by using and relying on biased sources is a proof of our position that the appointment of the country rapporteur itself came about as a result of a flawed process that suffered from political interference and subversion of human rights mechanism. With this in mind, the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to insist that the appointment of the special rapporteur was an appropriate decision that would lead to weakening of the Human Rights Council credibility as a body that must confine its activity to the provisions of international law. It is unfortunate that, like previous one, this report too fails in making any positive contribution to protection and promotion of human rights, as well as credibility of UN human rights machinery. And thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency, for your statement. We are presently holding an interactive dialogue on the report submitted by the Special Rapporteur. Participants are expected to make comments or ask questions on the report. I cannot fail to notice that the mandate holder was targeted in this statement, and the derogatory remarks and references were made against the person of the Special Rapporteur. This is a very serious issue. Everyone has the right to express his or her views about the report or activity of the mandate holder, but this should remain with the accepted framework, ensuring that the sense of respect permeates our discussion. In particular, no personal attacks against the Special Rapporteur should be made. I would also like to remind that there is a procedure in place whereby the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures or states may bring to my attention such an issue, as reiterated in the Presidential Statement 8/PRST/2. With this in mind, I give the floor to the next speaker. I give the floor to distinguished representative of Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sweden wishes to thank Dr. Shahid for his comprehensive report and for the substantial work conducted in ordeal circumstances. We appreciate the all-embracing approach taken and welcome the specific focus granted the human rights of women. Sweden notes with grave concern the Special Rapporteur's assessment that there continues to be widespread and systematic violations of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. A negative trend is observable in the status of the human rights of women, and a number of Iranian laws continue to discriminate against women, coupled with recent revisions of laws that impact their socio-economic rights. In June 2012, the Science and Technology Ministry announced that women sitting for the National Entrance Exam for Higher Education would be prohibited from enrollment in 77 fields of study at 36 universities across the country. Could the Special Rapporteur kindly elaborate on whether any change in this regard is detectable? Has the system been upheld, or is any trend, either positive or negative, visible? Sweden is dismayed about the continuously dire circumstances for the human rights of minorities, including religious groups, most notably the systematic discrimination of members of the Baha'i community. We also deplore the widespread use of torture in detention, as well as the escalating rate of executions, especially in the absence of fair trial standards, and urge Iran to discontinue these practices. Furthermore, Sweden considers it instrumental that media freedom, including net freedom, is respected by Iranian authorities. Dr. Shahid, could you kindly elaborate on what access people have to independent information? Sweden is alarmed about the 2 reprisal cases reported, wherein some 8 individuals were interrogated and tortured, accused for having been in touch with the Special Rapporteur. In conclusion, Sweden would like to express gratitude for the spirit of openness and dialogue through which the Special Rapporteur is carrying out his mandate. Thank you.
I thank you. I will now give the floor to representative of the European Union.
Mr. President, the EU thanks Dr. Shahid for his report and presentation. The EU is seriously concerned by the excessive number of executions carried out in the Islamic Republic of Iran, including of juveniles, in the absence of the fair trial standards prescribed by international law. We condemn the widespread use of torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Your report examines continuing widespread and systematic human rights violations, including violent suppression of dissidents, detention, severe discrimination against women and members of ethnic and religious minorities, restrictions of freedom of expression, assembly and religion or belief, harassment and arrest of human rights defenders. We are also alarmed by the continuous persecution of Iranian journalists and by infringements of media freedom, including on the Internet. The EU continues to raise its concerns and encourages Iran to comply with its international human rights obligations. For the past 2 years, Iranian opposition leaders Mehdi Karoubi and Mir Hossein Mousavi, as well as Mr. Mousavi's wife Zahra Rahnaward, have been under house arrest without charge. The Iranian authorities have failed to explain their arrest and detention, and we call on Iran to grant them their right to freedom of movement. We deplore the systematic harassment of members of religious minorities. We call on Iran to refrain from such practices and to ensure respect for freedom of religion or belief. We call for the immediate release of prisoners of conscience, including pastors Behnam Irani, Farshid Fathi, Saeed Abadini, and the leaders of the Baha'i community. We strongly regret that Iran has not cooperated with the Special Rapporteur by giving him or other UN special procedures access to Iran, despite its standing invitation, and urge Iran to do so in future. We appreciate the Special Rapporteur's outstanding work and strongly support the extension of his mandate. Dr. Shahid, the new Islamic Penal Code omits the penalty of stoning and reduces the range of offences carrying the death penalty for juveniles. What is your assessment on the impact of these new provisions on the death penalty in practice? Also, could you please elaborate on the restrictions to higher education for Iranian women? Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. I will now give the floor to the representative of Venezuela.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, President. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela once again manifests its refusal for the throwback practice of world powers to impose country mandates against developing countries, those which do not bow down before their imperial rulings. This seriously affects the credibility and integrity of the United Nations human rights system. These mandates hide behind the fig leaf of protecting human rights, but from the very outset, they are hallmarked by political manipulation by the dominant power, which aims to set itself up as a universal authority. They insist on using these multilateral fora to maintain their policy of aggression and hostility vis-à-vis sovereign peoples. The basis and premises of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran are in line with this policy of imperial aggression. They leave no major opportunity for genuine dialogue and international cooperation between peoples, which are the true instruments to be used to fight for the promotion and protection of human rights throughout the world. Iran has shown that it's willing to cooperate with the UN human rights mechanisms, with the positive results obtained within this very council as part of the Universal Periodic Review. They accepted 123 of the recommendations made by many of the states that took part in their review process, and these are recommendations that are currently being implemented. President, to conclude, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela once again expresses a wish for country mandates imposed by developed countries, such as this mandate, are once and for all done away with as part of this Council work. Today, more than any time, at any other time, we must have a responsible approach when we tackle the human rights challenges. We need to do away with politicization, selectiveness, and the double standards that these mandates represent, and which only heed and benefit the interventionist interests of the powers that promote them. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to the distinguished Ambassador of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States welcomes the latest report of Special Rapporteur Shahid, which details the Iranian government's ceaseless campaign of abuse against all who criticize or oppose it. The international community must have continued access to this type of thorough, credible, and unbiased reporting. The Special Rapporteur's findings in this report are serious and indicative of an ongoing and intensifying crackdown on human rights defenders and civil society actors. We are greatly concerned by reports of violations of women's rights and continued use of torture. The Iranian government has harassed and imprisoned human rights defenders, women's rights leaders, bloggers, labor leaders, and members of minority communities, including Azeris, Arabs, Kurds, Baluchis, Sunni and Sufi Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Baha'is. Journalists remain under assault, with over a dozen arrested since the start of 2013. The government's severe restrictions on the Internet continue to hinder citizens' ability to communicate and to access information freely. This campaign of harassment seeks to quash all remaining dissent before Iran's presidential election. We note that Iran continues to lead the world in executions per capita. Many have been executed in public after trials that did not conform to international legal obligations related to due process. Others have been harassed, arrested, or abused by security officials for peacefully expressing their views, including blogger Sattar Beheshti, who died in police custody days after his arrest. Months after Beheshti's death, reportedly as a result of torture, Iran still has not conducted a credible investigation into his case or sought to hold his killers accountable. The United States remains concerned that Iran has refused to cooperate or allow access to the Special Rapporteur, despite his numerous requests. We repeat our call for the Iranian authorities to grant access to Dr. Shahid so that he may carry out his mandate. The United States is also gravely concerned over reports of reprisals against those who have spoken with or cooperated with the Special Rapporteur. We remind the government of Iran their obligation to allow individuals to exercise their rights to freedom of expression and association, and to allow individuals and groups to maintain contact and cooperation with the mandates of this Council. We further urge them to take meaningful steps to prevent reprisals against such individuals and groups. In light of these concerns and others noted in the Special Rapporteur's report, the United States calls on this Council to renew the Special Rapporteur's mandate so that the international community continues to benefit from his indispensable reporting. We have the following questions. In light of the intensifying crackdown against civil society in Iran in advance of the forthcoming election, what steps can the international community take to help ensure the safety of those Iranians most at risk for persecution? And how would you address the most recent segregationist actions against women who represent half the population? Finally, what steps should be taken to pursue concerns about reprisals and ensure the safety of those who have contact with you and cooperate with your mandate? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform you that the list of speakers is now closed. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, Switzerland would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his report on the human rights situation in Iran. It takes up important problems related to human rights, such as the implementation of the death penalty, repressive practices against civil society and violations of the rights of women. Moreover, ethnic and religious minorities such as the Bahia, the Sunnis, Christians or Kurds are living under the threat of long-standing oppression. Mr. Special Rapporteur, we'd like to ask the following question. Switzerland is alarmed over the extensive use of the death penalty in Iran. What is your analysis of this practice? And how can the international community help to remedy the situation? Thank you very much.
I thank you. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ecuador would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for the report on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Ecuador has repeatedly stated that it rejects any initiative in the Human Rights Council seeking to use this body, whose supreme goal is to ensure the promotion, guarantee, and protection of human rights, to promote political and geopolitical agendas of certain states. The proliferation of individual resolutions on the human rights situation in Iran shows differentiated treatment, which is not objective, not very objective, and shows a strong political slant, which leaves no doubts as to the interests pursued by those who are promoting these documents, that is, to exercise pressure on the government of Iran so that it they can maintain their anti-imperialist policy contrary to the political and economic interests. This is clear not only in this council, but elsewhere. Ecuador is a country committed to the promotion and protection of human rights in the world, and therefore we've been able to condemn any type of action that has violated these rights, regardless of the perpetrators or the circumstances. Nonetheless, Ecuador is not going to take part in the strategy of attacking in a selective way certain members of the international community, using arguments such as human rights to cover up purely political intentions and using a double standard. Lastly, Ecuador, on the understanding that nothing can ever be done sufficiently to safeguard and guarantee the enjoyment of human rights, would call on the Iranian authorities to step up their work to promote and protect these rights. Along these lines, we would call on the government and people of Iran to abolish the death penalty and step up their cooperation with the Human Rights Council and other multilateral mechanisms which strive to uphold these rights. Lastly, Ecuador would like to invite the government of Iran to express its views and provide official information on the supposed violations of human rights that have been laid at its door in a transparent and efficient way. Thank you very much.
I thank you. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Norway would like to commend the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Dr. Shahid, for his comprehensive and relevant report. The human rights situation in Iran remains a cause for great concern for the government of Norway. We are particularly concerned with extensive use of the death penalty in Iran, especially against minors. Norway is also deeply troubled by the high number of mass executions, which raise serious questions about the right to each individual for a fair trial. Cases of amputations and flogging are also deeply worrying. Furthermore, restrictions on freedom of speech and assembly, unlawful detentions and torture, combined with a challenging working environment for human rights defenders, are severe obstacles for improving the situation. Norway is also concerned with the continued discrimination religious minorities are facing in Iran. Whilst we note that certain practices like public executions seem to be prohibited in the new draft Islamic Penal Code, we are also concerned that the new code provides for more severe punishment for other charges, including the death penalty for sodomy and enmity against God. Norway is against the death penalty in every circumstance, but would like to stress to Iran the most serious crimes requirement for the death penalty in international law. Norway urges Iranian authorities to allow the Special Rapporteur entry to the country. We also support the extension of the Special Rapporteur mandate. We would like to ask the Special Rapporteur whether he could elaborate on how he views the new draft Islamic Penal Code. Are there any improvements to the current Penal Code? Thank you.
I thank you. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The DPRK reaffirms its position that the country-specific mandates initiated and pursued by the Western countries are aimed to infringe upon the sovereignty and interfere in the internal affairs of the developing countries that are not obedient to them. It is an anachronistic act to maintain the country-specific mandates despite the full operation of the UPR mechanism, which treats all countries equally and impartially. Any attempt to interfere in the internal affairs and to impose unacceptable pressure under the pretext of human rights cannot be justified, as it is in flagrant breach of the purposes of the UN Charter and relevant norms of international law and the principle of respect for sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of the member states. We are of the view that human rights should not be misused as a tool for denouncing the legitimate government of a sovereign state. My delegation looks forward to the Human Rights Council eliminating all the country-specific resolutions and mandates, including those on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Distinguished Ambassador of Austria. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, President, and of course we align ourselves with the EU statement. I would like to thank the rapporteur for his detailed report and presentation. Austria shares his deep concern over the continuing and widespread systematic violations of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I would like to highlight 3 issues. We are deeply concerned about the situation of human rights defenders in the country who are subjected to harassment, arrest, interrogation and torture, and who are frequently charged with vaguely defined national security crimes. We particularly deplore the continued arrests, detention and prosecution of artists, labor activists, as well as journalists and bloggers. According to the latest reporting, around 60 journalists are currently imprisoned in Iran. Austria calls for their immediate release. We furthermore call on Iran to stop all harassment and attacks against human rights defenders, artists, labor activists and journalists, and to create a safe and enabling environment for them to operate. We are also alarmed by the disturbing rate of public executions in Iran, especially in the absence of fair trial standards and the application of capital punishment to offences that do not meet the most serious crimes standards in accordance with international law. Despite steps taken by Iran to abolish the death penalty for juveniles, their executions still continue. Austria is therefore urging the government of Iran to introduce a moratorium on the death penalty, in particular in the light of the consistent pattern of violations of due process standards. We also remain deeply concerned about the situation of religious minorities in Iran. While members of recognized religious minorities face discrimination, members of unrecognized religious minorities, including in particular the Baha'i, are subjected to systematic persecution. We therefore echo the call of the rapporteur for the immediate release of prisoners of conscience, such as the leaders of the Baha'i community. We would like to ask you, Dr. Shahid, how you would further elaborate on these cases. In conclusion, we would like to assure Mr. Shahid that we are a strong supporter of your mandate and will support its renewal at this session. In this respect, we call on the Iranian government to provide you with full and unhindered access to the country and to heed your recommendations. We also ask them to fully engage with all special procedures, treaty bodies and the Office of the High Commissioner in order to overcome the serious human rights problems in the country. I thank you.
I thank you, Excellency. I will now give the floor to the delegation of Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Czech Republic aligns itself with this intervention delivered by the EU. Mr. Shahid, we would like to thank you for your latest report. We deeply regret that the overall bad situation of human rights in Iran by no means improved in 2012. We are concerned about the impact of all reported widespread and systematic human rights violations on the functioning of civil society in Iran, especially less than 3 months ahead of the presidential elections. We thank the rapporteur for the focus he maintains on documenting torture in Iran. We are frustrated at the lack of attention by the Iranian authorities to the continued and widespread use of torture in detention and in prisons. A formal ban of torture, as you rightly said, is by far not enough to eliminate this unacceptable practice that appears to be largely tolerated by the government. The Czech Republic remains deeply troubled by the shrinking space for freedom of expression and assembly, with further erosion of space for independent political activities. Unfortunately, the alarming trend of shutting down the media and newspapers was rather strengthened in 2012. Like you, Mr. Shahid, we are concerned over the continued arrest, detention, persecution of dozens of journalists, among others Mr. Mehdi Rahmanian and Mr. Mohammed Mehdi Emami Nasseri, who are facing charges linked to national security or propaganda against the system. The Czech Republic is furthermore troubled by the situation of human rights defenders and lawyers who are subjected to harassment, arrest and repeated interrogation, like Mrs. Narges Mohammadi or Mrs. Nasrin Sotoudeh. Bearing in mind Article 25 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, we share your concerns, Mr. Rapporteur, about the limitations placed on the right of Iranian citizens to stand for presidential office. One could start with the impossibility for women to run up for the president and continue with the opposition members. The two main opposition leaders and former presidential candidates, Mr. Hossein Mousavi and Mr. Mehdi Karoubi, have remained under house arrest since 2010, which will clearly limit the potential for credible, inclusive and participatory presidential elections in 2013. We urge the government of Iran to release them, as well as hundreds of other prisoners of conscience. We recall in this respect what Secretary General mentioned in his report. The restricting freedom of expression and suppressing social activism will only set back development and plant the seeds of instability. Mr. Shahid, the Czech Republic would once again like to express to you our full support to your mandate. Thank you.
I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the last speaker we could accommodate this afternoon. This brings us to the end of this meeting. We shall reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for full-day meeting. Let me repeat, 9 a.m. for full-day meeting to continue and conclude the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of the human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, after which we will listen to the presentation of country reports of the High Commissioner, Secretary General and general debate under item 4. In the afternoon, we will then hold an interactive dialogue with the independent expert on minority issues, followed by the presentation of the report of the Forum of Minority Issues. After that, we will proceed with the presentation of reports of Human Rights Advisory Committee, followed by a general debate under item 5. I hereby close the 28th meeting of the 22nd session.
Thank you very much.
I thank you.